Midlife Crisis Journal, Day 5. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how one gets to a point where they have things pretty good. In my case, wife and 3 kids, good job, flexible job, time to do stuff, without getting a sense of accomplishment. That is enough to satisfy the idea, enough to satisfy a midlife crisis. We still feel like questioning things and kind of questioning everything, I guess. So first, it's a little chilly. First, let me talk about the family side, because that actually feeds into my academic / professional side a little bit, or history. So I met my wife in college, and well, she was actually my first girlfriend. I mentioned in an earlier video, wasn't exactly a socially limber teenager. So that especially came through in talking to girls and things like that. So very rarely was I getting the guts up to go ask a girl out, or wasn't exactly a charmer, I guess you could say. And that's even though I felt like there were some girls that were interested in me from time to time. Didn't really do much about it. But started dating my wife in college, and we dated for about 3 years or so until I proposed, and then we got married after about 4 years. So at that point, I was 24 when we got married, and we had our first kid when we were both 29. And then we had a kid again at 30. Was it 31, I think? Did I do the math right? No, I was 31. My wife was 30, and then we had our last one. We were both 34. Yeah. Last so far. We haven't eliminated the possibility of another one, I'll put it that way. So, man, it's cold. I was hoping if I started doing this in the spring, that it wouldn't be quite as chilly. Alright, so academically, how does one get to be in a nice spot? So just the end game here. So I have a house. My wife doesn't have to work. I work almost remotely. Going into work maybe like once or twice a month or so. Well, growing up, I was a pretty smart kid, but was probably overcomplimented for how smart I was, especially by my mom. Now, we don't need to get into why she may have done this. I think a lot of moms are like this, but I'm just giving an example of how I was probably my ego was pumped up a bit from a young age. When I was in 4th grade, so that was when I was about 10 years old, I remember we started doing probabilities in school, and there was a situation where my teacher definitely got a problem wrong. Talking about, what are the probabilities that you have if you have a coin and one die, one die. What are the probabilities that you flip heads and then roll any number? And the answer to that is 50%. The only possibilities are heads in any number and tails in any number, because you multiply the probabilities together. My teacher was trying to say you add the probabilities together. Was using this weird pie chart thing to do it. And I knew this was wrong, and the teacher didn't necessarily listen to me when I tried to explain that it was wrong. And I told my mom about this, and instead of just being a one-time thing and not that big of a deal, she would make a deal that, oh, well, you're smarter than your teacher. And would then repeat that throughout from then on. That, oh, remember when you were smarter than your teacher? There are other times where I got smarter than teacher ideas in my head when it wasn't necessarily true. So, for example, during the math for the Super Bowl that year, same teacher, there was one of those math problems where you had to start with, in this case, it was like a math, what was it? It was problems that build on each other. You're supposed to start with the number of NFL teams and you end up with the right answer at the end. So you start with, say, oh, how many NFL teams are? And at the time there were 30, but this worksheet was developed when there were 28 teams. And if you start with the number 28 and then you do like add this, multiply this based on all the questions, you come up with the right answer. So I kept saying, but no, there are 30. And she kept saying, well, yeah, there are 28. She didn't really explain that, you know, this is from before they got the 30 teams. She thought there were actually 28 teams, I guess. But, you know, so we're talking like, anyway. So that one I thought I was just clearly right. There are 30 teams, but didn't necessarily understand the full context, but still had the ego to think that I'm like, well, I know I'm smarter than my teacher. So that's how things kind of start out. And I was, like I said, I was a pretty sharp kid. I was like, I got into like the, you know, 1 out of 50 kid advanced math programs when I went to a better school district the year after that. But I went through most of my school years. I didn't just get as good a grade as possible. In fact, I didn't see that much value out of getting good grades. I already thought, at least I thought at the time, thought pretty highly of my abilities. So the grades were more of a nuisance than they were a chance to demonstrate anything or accomplish anything. For example, my high school years. So the way grades worked in my high school was, one, if you got, say, 89.5% for called a marking period, or for a quarter within the year, that was the same as getting as 99.9 or 100%. There was no grade difference. So I didn't see much value in getting better than about 90%. I would learn things and study things, but not completely. I would study a little bit. Then I would also take harder classes. So if you got a B in, you know, an AP class, that counted as an A in a regular class. So like a 4 in the GPA scale if you got a B in an AP class. 5 if you got an A, but I didn't see that much of a point to getting all A's because that actually would be a little bit difficult. Sorry, intentional yawns here, waking up. And yeah, so I actually got pretty good because I got a pretty good sense for when I knew enough to hit certain grade marks. It was actually kind of rare that I would get, say, below a 79.5 in an advanced class, which would be a B, and that's a 4. So anyway, this kind of bit me in the ass when I got to college, as we had, 1, no weighted classes, but 2, you had pluses and minuses. And I was actually doing a rough time with grades. I kept all my high school habits in a college environment. So my GPA, halfway through the first semester of my junior year, was down around 2. I actually got a letter from the dean, from threatening academic probation. So I made a deal with my new girlfriend at the time, was my now wife, to say if I didn't hit certain grades that were pretty aggressive, that I would, she bought Jets tickets and her dad would go instead of me. So that would be a threat of embarrassment. So I threatened myself into getting better grades, and I did pretty good. In fact, my last semester in college kept it going. I almost made the dean's list. My last semester, I got like a 3.47, whereas my GPA before that was like a 2.3 or something like that. I remember that I took a system dynamics class. I was a mechanical engineer student at Villanova. System dynamics was one of the senior classes, and I was the only person in the entire class that actually scored the highest on the final as anyone else, whereas I probably would have scored one of the lowest scores if it was in the first half of my college career. Just to back up a little bit, I got into Villanova, was the college I went to, when I was applying for colleges, I got waitlisted for a ton of other colleges. For example, like Lehigh, Lafayette, Bucknell, colleges like that. Even got waitlisted to the College of New Jersey, but it's because I applied a little bit late, because my application was like a decent-ish GPA, and so it was like a 3 point something, 3.6 maybe, but my SATs are pretty good. This was like the first year of the 2,400 point SAT. I think I got 2,100 out of 2,400, but I got a 1,450 out of the old 1,600, and 780 out of 800 math. So it was good enough that I got into Villanova. I still had an uncle that went there. So I kind of backed my way into college by just barely getting in. And then I backed my way into good grades by threatening myself, not with a promise of accomplishment, but with the threat of embarrassment if I failed. Got my first job out of college, because I eventually went to a career fair where I got hired, met a company, and got hired with the understanding that my GPA that I put on my resume was a senior year GPA, which may have been misinterpreted as a full GPA. I applied for like 40 jobs online and got 2 interviews out of all those. Neither of them I got the job, but then I got that one job at a small company. Moved up here to a better company with, I don't know, I guess I just hit a job application well. And I told a good story about a project that I worked on where, in reality, the project, I almost like lit equipment on fire, but I didn't mention that because it was a cool test setup that I had, and I got a job at my current company. Since I've been here, I got my MBA. I got my MBA through a mostly online program, but I got into a pretty good school. I got into North Carolina to work at my MBA because I got a good GMAT score. Again, like that's and a 730 GMAT. So like I'm talking about like one-time things. I was always able to fall back on being able to pull things off like for GMAT 1 tests, as opposed to say years of hard work. And as I've gone through my career, I've been able to find jobs that I'm good at. I was been promoted in place a handful of times. So I've gone from a labor grade level 2 coming into the company, because I had about 4 years experience when I came here. So I worked 4 years at the smaller company that I met at the career fair. Now I'm over 10 years at this company. I came in at level 2, I'm now level 6. And it's funny, at a large corporation, you kind of just do your job more so than figure out your job, especially earlier on in the job, and so to figure things out and do well and take on more work and be efficient with it. Getting promoted in a job is different from necessarily feeling accomplishment the way that I would say I know I'm using all of my skills, because you see, as I've been doing this, especially the last few years, I've been trying to dabble in other things. I started writing a blog, a sports blog, a statistics blog. I actually got offered a freelance opportunity with a pretty major website and took it up. It was not for much money. It was like $20 an article, but I was like, oh, I guess I'm able to write pretty well. I started up another YouTube channel and actually got it monetized. It's not huge, but it's hit the monetization threshold, the basic threshold on YouTube. So there's some feedback to say, like, I'm pretty good at doing that stuff. I coach my kids' sports teams, and kids ask to be on those teams. I think I'm a pretty good sports coach. I feel like there are a lot of things that I'm like good at, but I don't use in my daily job at all. And my job, it's not like I work for something I came up with. I'm kind of just at a large company and figuring out where I can fit in, or where I can help. So that's where it feels like I've backed my way into current position. There's not a point where I've made, say, huge financial decisions either to set myself apart. So, yeah, it feels like I haven't fully taken advantage of what I can do. If I had, I think it would be something like taking that last minute energy that I have, but feel compelled to do it on a regular basis because the reward of the thing I'm working on is it's like inherently something I would want. So that's kind of what it's where I have to go, I think. I think that we kind of talked about yesterday, the resolution to a midlife crisis is probably going to be something like me either figuring out my life's task or redefining my life's task as just being happy with my life's task being more so just doing what I have. And I don't know that I would rather the former than the latter, because I do feel like I have untapped, or I haven't quite figured out how to put all my different skills together. So, all right, I think that's probably good for today. Day 5 in the books. Hopefully it's a little warmer tomorrow.